would like to give you the perspective not only from the consumer side, because of course we also have producers in our ranks, but of course we, in this case, we are very much on the consumer side, and for Business Europe, energy policy as a whole, but certainly also gas plays a key role. To start a little early, I mean, I think one of the things the crisis has told us is we cannot be successful without a competitive and sizable industrial base. I think this is very clear, and I mean now this is on all the speeches of all the politicians after the crisis. But I think there's one thing we have to be very clear about. I mean, we will not be able to have a competitive and strong industrial base in Europe without energy supply with a certain extent of security. I would even say an excellent extent of security, and Hans has stressed it, at competitive prices, because the price differential we are having in certain fields is simply not to be earned at the market. And I'm the first one to underline what Hans said, and this goes for the electricity sector, this goes for the gas sector. This is certainly not the fault of the producers. Problems lies very much with politics, but I'll come to this. I think it's very timely to have this debate because there's many challenges arising on this story. I mean, I don't have to mention them all. We have a total how to say, unstable situation in the Middle East. We have the problem on the eastern borders once again, and I'll come to this. And of course we have, and the chairman stressed it, we have a different situation in the US, where the US is going to the direction, after being a large demander of energy, I mean, to prepare to be a producer or to be an exporter, and hopefully also to Europe. Well, as far as the prices is concerned, I mean, and again, I agree with Hans. I mean, this is not the fault of the producers, but as an industry, I have to look at the end prices. And for instance, if I look at gas, I mean, at the time being, in the US, you will pay $4 per BTU, whereas in Europe the price is 8. Used to be 10. I mean, now, but now with the dropping oil price, it came to 8. Overall, I think the decoupling, or step-by-step decoupling, we are not there, of the gas price from the oil price is a very good thing. Of course, there's people who think this is happening at the wrong moment as the oil price is dropping, but think overall this is a very good thing. And if you had a look, I mean, just when I went in, the Brent is at 57 for a number of reasons, so it's popping up again. I had a chat with governmental officials from Iran recently. They have the oil price in their budget with 65. Of course, this doesn't say much, but well, we don't expect the oil price to stay below 50 or close to 50, but we'll see. But the fact is that as far as gas is concerned, we have a price differential to the US, which is more or less half the price in the US. Then at the same time, and part of the emotions have been reflected by Hans, we have an emotional debate on a number of things. I mean, first on our indigenous resources, and we have quite some. Of course, the traditional ones are dropping, but there is, of course, new ones which could be exploited. And then we have at the same time the strategy to become the world's best in renewable, which is a good thing as such. But this is something I would totally agree with Hans. I mean, if we do it in the distortive manner we're having it now, it is highly costly. It's totally distorting the internal market, and it's not furthering anything at the end of the day. And I have many examples, like Hans stressed it. When I was responsible for the Austrian industry some years back, I had cases where the same plant producing the same things via the same technologies, in Austria they would have to pay 7 to 8 million euros a year for the renewable system. And in countries like some of our neighbor countries, you would get 7 or 8 million euros as a subsidy. So of course, I mean, this brings you to a small plant to a gap of 15 million, and you have to earn it, so this is not a good point. And then of course, we are also trying to be at the forefront of fighting against global warming. I mean, this is something very good, but of course, at the end of the time, we have to be realistic and also see how we can do it. And as we are speaking about gas today, I mean, of course, we need to talk about gas, because gas is certainly a big part of the solution. And as much as I agree with Hans on targets, not always on the figures, but on the necessity to go there, I don't like the word decarbonization so much, because it's hinting to the wrong direction, because then you have debates with certain people who think that all kinds of hydrocarbons are bad per se, which is simply not true. I think it will be impossible to do without hydrocarbons in Europe for a very long time, and we should think and we should talk about a low emission economy, which means that gas is more interesting than maybe other sources, but also within coal. I mean, you have very clean coal, you have coal which is polluting enough. So I think the debate we need is a much more detailed and precise one than the one we sometimes are having. Coming back to the energy union and being in the game for a while, but not as long as Hans, so maybe I'm not as frustrated, but of course I'm critical. I remain to be an optimist, but I want to be an activist optimist. So therefore, there's a number of things I think we will have to do, because there's a number of difficulties we are facing, not new. I mean, we are talking about this since a while, but now I think the energy union, which is a necessity. But to give an answer to one of the points you were stressing, I don't think there is a controversial between energy union and some of the aspects you were raising, because we talk about an energy union based on an internal energy market, and I would very much underline the word market. So, but we can talk about this later. Well, number one problem is that, and I stressed it a little bit, I don't think that European energy policy has got the right balance between security of supply, sustainability and competitiveness. And we will certainly have to reorient it towards more security of supply and towards more cost competitive. At the same time, and I stress this as well, we try to lead by example on the global climate front, and to be honest, this is not successful because, and Mr. Lubers talked about the G2, I don't see that many parts of the world take Europe as an example, which is sad, but I think this is a fact. If I look at the G2, and they have pledged certain points, and this is very important, but what the Chinese have pledged is that they made a calculation when they would have a peak anyhow, which is in 2030, and then they said, okay, we might have the peak in 2030, but no binding obligations anyhow. And the US, well, was a little more ambitious. I mean, thanks to President Obama. Let's see whether these provisions will at the end of the day pass the hill, which is always the question in the US. But they have been a little more ambitious. But if you look at their figures, what they pledged and what it's really worth, it is maybe half. So it's not -30, it's -15. But still, this is a good thing. But the message is we want to make Paris a success, the COP21. We think we need a global solution for a global problem. We're really pushing for this. We work on this with our partners. We work on this on the level of the B20. We just had the B20 summit meeting 3 weeks ago in Istanbul, and we were really encouraging our partners, and we do one by one. But of course, this will be a challenge, and I stressed the G2. And then, of course, and I stressed this as well, I mean, we have energy bills which are rising. So we really appreciate that this new Commission is focusing at the energy union, because we think this is really a necessity. But at the same time, and I cannot underline it enough, I mean, we need to have cost competitiveness in mind. Hans was stressing rightly that many of my members have to compete globally. To bring you 2 examples which come to my mind, I mean, one is an Austrian steel company. I have the figures in mind. They have an investment in Texas, and I had a look on their figures, and if you compare the figures, I mean, the difference in bill is 80 million euros a year. Then I had a look at the figures of a larger German chemical industrial company. They have a large investment, and the difference in their bill is 500 million euros a year. So this is money you cannot earn. Of course, then you have debates that carbon leakage is not happening, and people in the Commission tell me, well, I mean, we don't have any evidence for this. Of course, it's not like it's happening. I mean, nobody takes a factory under the arm and brings it to Asia or to the US. But what is happening, and of course, this is all very long-term decisions, same for the producers as well, I mean, I totally acknowledge this, is that investment is scaled down on the one side of the Atlantic and scaled up on the other side of the Atlantic, and this goes step by step, and the moment you realize it's way too late. So we need to keep this in mind. So what needs to be done? First, And again, I agree with Hans, if we don't get the governance and the framework right, it will not be the solution to everything, but still, I think we have to improve the physical network. We need to really build up this internal energy market, and we really need to improve the interconnections, because of course the governance is the problem, but there is still parts. I mean, if I talk about the islands, and I mean the true islands, but then the Baltics, and also the interconnections between France and Spain, and so on and so on. So there's still a lot to do on the front of the interconnections. And overall, we improved. We can have the assessment today that if there was a major shock, we would stand it for longer than we would have done 5 years ago. I mean, this is good evidence. Of course, not everything which is stressed by the Commission and what is existing on paper is really existing, because if you look then into details, sometimes it's not the same pressure, sometimes the reverse flow works or not. So not everything which is there on paper is really working, but I think we made progress, and this is very important. At the same time, and this is something I would as well underline a lot, and I think this goes in Hans's direction, what we need is more coordination. I mean, we cannot, and the key example for me is the Deutsche Energiewende. You cannot simply take a decision, whatever it takes or costs for your partners, without discussing this on European level or without discussing this for European partners. So we were very much in favor, and we stressed it on many times, for a mandatory process of consultation between the member states before you take a decision which is having heavy consequences on your neighbors. There is a stepping stone for this in one of the conclusions of the recent European Council meetings, and I think we will have to capitalize on this when we go forward in the energy union debate. Then, and the moderator has stressed it, of course we have to reduce our dependency from too few sources. And there is of course a mix of necessities there to be tackled. Do we have to be totally self-sufficient? I don't know. We have to reduce our dependency, and we have to make sure that we don't depend on too few sources. And of course, if you are as lucky as the US is at the time being, and if you can turn the game around, this is a good thing. But on the other hand, I mean, we are for free trade, so I mean, there's no totally necessity to be total self-sufficient. Even so, I would say we need to reduce. So this means, number one, we have to diversify our sources of natural gas internationally. So number one, I would be totally in favor of a more coherent external energy diplomacy. I think this is something where a lot can be done, but to answer one of your questions right away, we are pretty skeptical on the common gas purchasing mechanism, for the simple reason that, again, I would underline the word market, and there is competition rules, there's also WTO rules, this will have to be checked. So I don't say we're against it, but I would say we're pretty skeptical, and we would have a close look that this is not something which is totally excluding the functioning of the market, because I think then it would not be a good thing. But when I talk about external sources, what do I mean? Well, number one, of course, looking to the West. One of the reasons why we are so persistent in the TTIP negotiations to get an energy chapter is that we think it's simply not feasible that the US says we only export, let's say, LNG up to a certain extent. Then they say, okay, you are for the market, and it goes to Asia for higher prices. Anyhow, if it goes to Asia for higher prices, fine. But the problem is, first, when you want to export it, you need to go through a very erratic process in order to get a license. So this we want to eliminate. We were aligned with the United States of America when we talked to our Chinese partners that we thought that they should not have an export ban on the rare earths, and we were successful meanwhile. So we would expect the same from our partners on US side, but it also includes Canada. I think Canada is often forgotten in this game. As far as oil is concerned, I mean, this is the number 3 potential in the world, not production, but potential. There is Saudi Arabia, then there is Venezuela, if you believe in the figures. And then there is Canada, and there's certainly an option for LNG, and they are about to build the infrastructure to be needed. But of course, we have to look east as well. And this means, before everything, we need to come to a stable relationship with our main suppliers. I don't see a real future totally without Russian gas. Of course, we need to handle this in a way that we are not totally dependent on this gas. But looking at the quantities, I mean, we have to stabilize this. And this is also something I had the chance to to speak at the gas conference in Vienna last week, and there was Mr. Medvedev there, and there was Mr. Zubkov there, the chairman of Gazprom, and I was having this message very clearly. I mean, Russia has been a reliable supplier even in the darkest time of Cold War. So if there are signals now which are questioning this factor, I mean, of course, this is not in our interest, but it's certainly not in the interest of the supplier, because it will put a lot of question marks on a number of things. Having said so, I think we need Russian gas to a certain extent. Of course, we need a safe way to bring it to Europe, and I would say including Central Europe. And I mean, don't want to go too much into details, but at the end of the day, I don't really see an alternative in also investing in the infrastructure in Ukraine. But of course, it needs also to look in options in Central Asia and other options in Middle East, and to say it clearly, at one stage, we will have to have a very clear, and I think this is a key necessity for Europe, a very clear idea, how do we bring gas, European gas, from the Black Sea and later from the Eastern Mediterranean to Europe, and also, and I underline this, to Central Europe. But in order to do all this, I mean, you need a lot of investment, and for this you need a lot of incentives. I don't talk about money, I need to talk about the right framework. I hope that the Juncker plan will be part of the answer, but also Hans has stressed it. We support this a lot, but sometimes politicians are saying, well, this is improving the investment climate. And I'm saying, no, it's not improving the investment climate. It can help to kickstart, but investment climate, we will have to improve it step by step by doing all the necessities and reforms in order to really improve the investment climate. And then let me finish. Of course, we also have to work on our indigenous sources. There is some possibilities, I mean, going from power to gas technologies to others. But let me underline this, because the moderator has stressed it. We don't have the gas, well, we have it, but we have it in a frozen form, and the name is shale gas. Of course, I mean, at the time being, I mean, there's not so much investment probability when the oil price is that low, but I think we shall take this into account. We need to have this part of our possibilities. And coming from Austria, I mean, people always say this is not huge. Well, of course, we would need to do the exploration to really know, but I mean, on the seismics, in Austria, we would think that there is, I mean, it's forbidden now for political reason, but we would have the potential to cover our total needs for at least 30 years. I would rather say 50, but at least 30 years, so we don't talk about small triggers here. Coming to the end, or rather to the end, give me 2 more minutes, I would again underline what Hans was stressing. It's very much about the regulatory environment. I mean, we have tax burdens, we have storage taxes, fees, surcharges, and so on and so on. There's a long list, and this is undermining competitiveness, and this is leading to the very uncompetitive end prices. And I would say one of the first things, of course, is we need to harmonize. This is number one, which is always very difficult in these fields. But politicians need to understand that energy has to stop to be the alternative source of taxation to all the others which were not popular at a certain time. I mean, this was the mood for a long time, but this needs to stop, and on the contrary, we need to reverse this story because otherwise it will not work. Coming to the hot potato, Hans stressed it, the emission trading system and the market stability reserve, and we were just recently, or we're in the middle of a number of partly erratic votes in the European Parliament. So just to be very clear on this, we support the market stability reserve. Hans knows it, because we also totally agree that we need to bring in some stability in this market, and that we had too much volatility. Of course, we see it with a clear link to an improved carbon leakage protection post-2020, because whatever we do, we need to protect the industry which will otherwise leave Europe, and there's very clear indication for this. I totally understand that the power sector needs a clear price signal, and that there is a certain question mark on certain investments. Our position is still, and we are for legal certainty and foreseeability, that it should happen 2020. But, and I think we really came in our internal debates to a balanced position, we don't say that the 900 million which have been backloaded should go back in the market in 2019 or 2020. Because we think this would be unbearable for the market, and we think it should go directly to the market stability reserve, of course with a certain earmarking on carbon leakage protection. but I think we came to quite a balanced view on this. And of course, I know that you would like to have it earlier, but I think the important thing is that we get a decision done, because be it 2017, 19 or 20, once you have certainty on this, I think you can price it into your investment decision. So there's many more things which could be said, but I'll stop here. There's a lot we need to do. Let me be an optimist. Let's say the Energy Union is a chance to tackle the things we should have tackled for years, and let's do it.